Hi guys, I chose Edgar Allan Poe for my midterm project. And a little bit about Poe is that he was born to traveling actors in Boston on January 19th, 1809. Both of Poe's parents died before he was even 3 years old. He was then separated from his brother and sister and taken in by John Allan and his wife Frances Allan, who were both wealthy tobacco merchants in Richmond, Virginia. In 1826, Poe left Richmond to attend the University of Virginia, where he excelled in all of his classes, but accumulated lots of debt. By the end of the first term, he was so poor that he had to start burning his furniture to stay warm. Poe became so furious with Allan for only giving him a third of the funds he needed for school that he had to drop out and move back home to Richmond, where he found out that his fiancée Elmira Royster was engaged to another man. Poe ended up very heartbroken. Poe finally stormed out of the Allan mansion determined to become a great poet. Not long after, he published his first book, Tamerlane, when he was only 18. Soon after that, he enlisted in the United States Army, and 2 years after enlisting, he joined the United States Military Academy at West Point, only to be kicked out after 8 months. Poe then went to Baltimore, where his Aunt Maria Clem welcomed him into her home, and her daughter Virginia soon became Poe's object of desire. Allan died when Poe was in Baltimore, leaving him out of the will. This is when Poe started publishing his short stories. He won a contest sponsored by the Saturday Visitor. Poe got a position at the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond, and this is where Poe finally found his life's work as a magazine writer. Poe soon developed a reputation as a fearless critic who not only attacked an author's work but also insulted the author and the Northern literary establishment with his book reviews and his short stories. At age 27, he brought Maria and Virginia to Richmond and married Virginia while she was only 13. The January 1845 publication of The Raven made Poe a household name. Poe and Virginia moved into a tiny cottage in the country after rumors of his wife's deteriorating health got out. Virginia died that winter of 1847 at the age of 24 from tuberculosis. Poe then returned to Richmond and connected with his first fiancée, Elmira Shelton, who is also now a newly widowed. Then they became engaged again and planned on getting married once he got back from his trip to Philadelphia and New York. On his way to Philadelphia, though, he decided to stop in Baltimore and disappeared for 5 whole days. Nobody knew where he was, and he was found in a bar room of a public house that was being used as a polling place for an election. One of the magazine editors sent Poe to Washington College Hospital, where Poe spent his last days, and neither his mother-in-law nor his fiancée knew what had happened until they read it in the newspapers. Poe died on October 7th, 1849, at the age of 40. We still do not know his exact cause of death to this day. The 5 poems I chose to analyze were Romance, which was published to a preface of Al Araf Tamerlane and Minor Poems in 1829. It wasn't named Romance until February 25th, 1843, and it was then published into the intro of the 1831 to Poems by Edgar Allan Poe. The second poem I picked was Alone, which was a manuscript that was signed E.A. Poe and was dated March 17, 1829. In September of 1875, the poem, which had been in possession of the family in Baltimore, was then published with its title in Scribner's Monthly. The third poem I chose was The Sleeper, which was published in 1831 with 74 lines in Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. And then later, on May 22nd, 1841, it was published to Philadelphia Saturday Courier with only 60 lines. The fourth poem I chose was A Dream Within a Dream, and that was first published on March 31st, 1849, to an edition of a Boston-based magazine called The Flag of Our Union. And the last poem I chose was The Spirits of the Dead, which was first published in 1827, and it was also in one of the first poetry collections called Tamerlane and Other Poems, and it was also originally titled Visits of the Dead. A piece of literary criticism that I had found on Poe, I found it on EBSCO on an article titled Poe as Critic, Poe Abroad, and it was also written by Daniel Hoffman. Throughout the whole article, he basically talks about how Poe's writing demonstrated his critical mind and his analysis of the structure and the texture of verse. He also talked about how Poe always had a need for all details of diction, imagery, rhythm, and form to all contribute to a single effect. The one poem that I chose to go over kind of more in depth was Romance. And I picked this poem just because of the title, because when I was younger and going through high school and, junior high and high school, I read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories and poems, and everything always seemed so dark. So I had never read this one, and when I seen the title, it kind of made me have a happy feeling instead of a dark place like he normally has. So the poem is Romance. Who loves to nod and sing, with drowsy head and folded wing, among the green leaves as they shake, far down within some shadowy lake. To me a painted parakeet hath been a most familiar bird, taught me my alphabet to say, to lisp my very earliest word. While in the wild wood I lie, a child with the most knowing eye, of late eternal condor years, so shake the very heaven on high. With trumpet as they thunder by, I have no time for idle cares. Through gazing on the unquiet sky, and when an hour with calmer wings its down upon my spirit flings, that little time with lie and rhyme to while away forbidden things, my heart would feel to be a crime unless it trembled with the strings. So what I took from the poem was that I kind of believed he was writing about himself from when he was a younger child up until he was a young adult. And I got this from, in the beginning, it talks about, while in the wild wood I lie, a child with the most knowing eye. Kind of goes into more depth about good memories he has from his childhood. And then later on in the poem, Poe talks about how of late eternal condor years, which kind of means that years have passed by since he's been a child. And he also talks about the hard times he's been through, and an example of that would be far down within some shadowy lake, and with trumpet as they thunder by, I have no time for idle cares. I believe overall that he's saying that life may be hard, but if you still have hope that it'll get better, then maybe it's not so bad. You can kind of tell this through reading, my heart would feel to be a crime unless it trembled with the strings. So the one specific image I understood from the whole poem was that Poe sees romance as a bird. And you can see this through who loves to nod and sing with drowsy head and folded wing among the green leaves as they shake. So in the beginning of the poem, it sounds like a bird, and it kind of gives Poe a happy memory of being a child. And we can see that through, to me a painted parakeet hath been a most familiar bird, taught me my alphabet to say, to lisp my very earliest word. And that's also another clue that kind of tells us he's talking about himself and being a child in the first part. So then you can also hear towards the end that Poe's tone seems to change when he talks about the bird, and how maybe it can go from him being sad to a good memory by, and when an hour with calmer wings, it's down upon my spirit flings. And Poe's tone overall in the poem seems to be kind of sad and depressed, but then you can also see a glimmer of hope at the end. His tone changes when he talks about the bird, which would represent romance, and he has had a hard life, losing many of the people he's loved, including his parents and his foster parents and his wife. So it can kind of be seen throughout the poem that he's talking about that through the bird. The word that stands out to me the most would be romance, and how it doesn't only mean happiness, but it also kind of brings back good memories for him as a child and a young adult. Excuse me. He also states of late internal condor years, which also gives us a clue that he isn't a child anymore and years have passed and now he's a young adult. The three figures of speech I've seen throughout the poem would be a metaphor, and this was used when Poe mentions eternal condor years and when an hour with calmer wings. In both of these statements, Poe isn't only talking about the time that has passed since he's been a child, but also about the bird. Imagery was shown throughout the poem because he's kind of trying to bring it back to life, and says green leaves as they shake, and within some shadowy lake, and a painted parakeet, so we can kind of get a better picture while we're reading it. And the third one would be personification, and this figure of speech was used throughout the entire poem to me. The biggest example would be romance, who loves to nod and sing, because Poe had given romance human characteristics. The sources I used for this poem are poemmuseum.org and the article on EBSCO. And that is all. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I can't wait to watch everyone else's. Thanks.